Well, welcome to the Speak with People podcast. My name is Jason Raitz. I'm excited that you are joining us today. At Speak with People, we believe that our words matter and that healthy communication is oxygen for our relationships and our leadership. So whether you communicate one-on-one, on a team, from a stage, or from behind a screen, we hope this podcast encourages you, inspires you, and really challenges you to choose to communicate in healthy ways, because we know when we do, your world, our world, my world will just be better, and it will drastically improve our relationships and our leadership. Well, today I am so excited because we have an incredible guest on today's podcast, and we're continuing our series, Becoming Great at Your Craft. If you love to communicate from the stage, if you deliver tons of presentations, if you are a speaker who travels or a speaker who loves to do it, whatever place you are at, we're trying in this series to give some very practical ways for you to elevate and continue to grow your craft of communicating. So today we're going to ask questions about connecting with our audience. Are there secret skills that we can learn that can deepen those connections? We're going to talk about how, are there habits that we need to figure out and getting to know our audience and how to truly connect. And so it's going to be a great episode. And we're joined by somebody that honestly, I've wanted to know for years. I've admired them from afar and just love them. One of my favorite communicators on the planet. I've been in the audience many, many times as they have communicated. And I can tell you that they are just one of the best that I have ever heard. So I'd like to welcome Stuart Hall to the podcast. Welcome, Stuart. Thanks for being a part today.
Jason, I am overwhelmed that you are that impressed with my ability to communicate. And I would like to say to your audience right now, prepare, ladies and gentlemen, to be underwhelmed with my presentation. It is so good to be here, man. Thank you for asking. I'm honored.
I love it. Well, hey, before we hop into the questions, maybe we, for our audience, just to kind of get to know you a little bit more, maybe tell us a little about your story, who you are, what you do, family, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Best part about me is my wife, Kelly. She and I have been married for 31 years. She's the greatest thing about me. We have 3 young adult children. Our son, Grant, is 27. Our daughter, Chandler, is 25. Youngest daughter, Cameron, is 22, both our daughters actually went to school, played sports at their respective colleges. Our oldest daughter, Chandler, played basketball at Rollins College in Winter Park. And then youngest daughter, Cameron, is just wrapping up her soccer career at the University of Florida.
Oh, wow.
That's the reason why I knew who Kyle Trask was earlier. But 34 plus years, next generation ministry, have zero plans to do anything else. Kelly and I hope and pray that we can skid across the finish line with our hair on fire, believing in the next generation. And a ton of that time has been, for whatever reason, and still haven't figured it out, with me on stage speaking to teenagers. And then since 2008, I'm the director of student leadership for an organization called Orange, and also lead a couple initiatives, influencer, leader, and captains as a part of that initiative. So live just north of Atlanta in a little town called Beaufort that is exactly like it sounds.
I love it. Well, that's fantastic. Well, today, as we kind of dive into this idea of like really connecting with your audience, I wanted to just kind of start with this, like as you approach a speaking engagement or, getting up in front of your audience, how do you prepare for that? Are there some things that you do to get to know your audience beforehand? Or, is there like a checklist that you go through? Would love to just know what kind of goes into that.
Yeah, that's such a great question. What's interesting is when I was younger, I think my preparation basically insisted of, I get a chance to say something.
Yep.
And then I started maturing, and I started asking myself, do I have anything to say? Which is, I think, is an incredible question. And now at 55 years old and having stood up on stages for 30 something years, I think the most important question I can ask is, what is it that the host and what is it that the teenagers need to hear me say? It's not really as much about me as it is the audience. I think it's flipped. When I was younger, it was very me focused. and now it's become extremely audience focused.
Yeah.
So the primary question I am asking if I'm invited to speak somewhere by whomever the host is what is it that you need me to say, or what is it that you want me to talk about? And then for them to give me a snapshot, I think it's a mistake, Jason. Oftentimes we have what I call the white horse syndrome as communicators. We think we've been either hired or invited to ride in on a white horse and save the day and expound some incredible exposition of, if it's to faith communities, some biblical truth or something that will inspire generations. And we forget that especially in faith communities, I have to keep this in mind all the time, that there are men and women who have been investing in teenagers for years. And I am simply there to help that kid take one step further in becoming the best version of the person God created them to be. And if I'm not careful, I can actually destroy a ton of relational equity by saying something that's absolutely ridiculous just because I'm all up in myself. So I think purpose is a big part of this. Like, I love for a host to tell me, this is our theme, this is what I want you to talk about, because it allows me to know it's much easier to have a specific bullseye than it is for someone to tell you, this is the worst. Well, I just trust your heart. Well, you don't know my heart. I mean, I could be really struggling, So once the purpose becomes clear to me, then I'm asking, like, what is the universal tension that everybody feels about this thing? As it, for me, because I speak to a ton of faith communities, how do the scriptures and the person, example, and teachings of Jesus, like, speak to this? And then this is huge. Like, I want teenagers and adults and parents and leaders and coaches to walk away being able to apply something that I said. Like, if they walk away and there's not any handles, which leads to another thing that's important. More times than not, Jason, with a talk or a series of talks, I try to start at the end. Like, how am I handing this off if a group of students are about to go into a small group with a small group leader, an adult who invests a ton of time in them? How do I best hand the baton off to that adult? And more times than not, the best way to hand it off is not to land the plane. The best way to hand it off is to level up the plane and then give the controls to the leader. Oof. And way too often as a communicator, I've made the mistake of, I feel like it's my job to land the plane.
Yeah.
And then they go in small group and they don't have a ton to talk about.
Right. Right.
Because I've already solved the tension for them, or I've kind of brought home the point, or here's the punchline. So I think that's a big deal. I also want to bring most of my energy to whatever text. When I was younger, my illustrations had so much energy because I had a funny story or a moving story or a dramatic occasion. And what I realized is that so much of my talk was front loaded because I brought all my energy to some funny story, and I wasn't really bringing energy to the very thing I wanted them to remember, the very thing I wanted them to apply, the thing that I wanted them to understand. And then, for me personally, I speak so often to the most anxious ADHD generation in the history of our country.
Right.
So if I am not constantly making transitions, moving from, a movie clip to an illustration to an object lesson, I have to constantly shift.
Right.
Because their attention spans are so small.
And it just is so different. I remember, 95, first time that I'm hired to start standing in front of people. And, especially in faith communities, for the most part, kids, they sit there, and nowadays you're just so right. Like they're moving and they're going so quick to make that shift is just absolutely huge for communicators.
Yeah. One last thing I would say to this question. someone a long time ago, I have never forgotten this, Jason. They said green rooms are for people who need to feel important.
Huh.
I try as hard as I can, especially with teenagers. I am a 55 white has-been athlete who really never was.
Yeah.
There's nothing cool, relevant, or sexy about me. So I have to try as hard as I can to relationally connect to teenagers before I walk on stage.
Yep.
So that just me having a conversation with a group of guys and complimenting their shoes, or, dude, do you play ball? Or what's the video game you guys are playing on your phone?
Yep.
I have immediate street cred and leverage when I walk on stage, because more oftentimes than not, they don't know I'm the communicator.
Right.
They just know when I walk on stage, they're like, oh my gosh, that was the dude that's speaking to us. So
Yep.
I'm also fishing when I'm in the audience. Like, what school do you go to? What's your mascot? Who, I'll ask girls, who's the hottie on campus that I can make fun of in just a second when I get on, on stage? Things like that allows me to hopefully gain some relational equity when I walk out.
Yep.
And start.
Boy, that's so huge. I mean, you just took us, to so many great places, especially the difference between younger and older, just starting off to more seasoned. There's just this crazy switch that happens, and maybe I'm off, you can tell me, but, when I was younger, boy, I was so me focused, just like you just talked about. I was hoping they would laugh at my jokes, and I put all of my energy into those illustrations because it's just hilarious. The story when I break my father-in-law's toilet, everybody laughs,
Right.
But
right.
And I'll never forget, probably 15 years in, walking through a student event, and a youth pastor walked up to me and he's like, oh my goodness, I attended this event when I was a kid and I remember that story about the bird.
Yeah.
And there's this moment where I'm like, okay, that's cool, but man, did you like,
yeah, did I say anything remotely worthwhile?
Right. Right. So just the wisdom of like where to, put your energy and resources, to be able to connect.
To encourage the younger you, and to maybe give therapy to the younger me. If a teenager remembers anything you said, you've done a pretty remarkable job.
Yeah.
Because let's think about if you've sat in a church service the last 2 months, do you remember anything your pastor said?
Right.
I mean, most of us can't. So the fact that a kid walks up to you and remembers a fart story is you've moved the ball down the field a little bit.
Yeah, it's helpful, very helpful. And I know it's different for some communicators, because there are some communicators listening who communicate to the same audience every single week, and that's a whole different, a whole different arena when it comes to some skills. You have built trust, you've built time, you have, history with them.
No question.
When you're walking into a brand new place, that's why I love, this summer, much like you, I'm 47, older guy, not much cool about me. But, when I walk into summer camp, the first day, nobody knows who I am. It's just a riot. You ask some of those questions and knew that. And then by like day 4 or 5, they're like, oh yeah, you're that guy, you're that guy, but to have that. So you gave us some great wisdom there, so pre-stuff, as you're getting ready and you're planning for the event, is there anything that you're, doing, thinking about when it comes to, your audience demographics or their interests, or, kind of assembling any of that kind of stuff?
Well, what's interesting in America is that I think psychographics are much more important than demographics today.
Wow.
And here's what I mean by that. You can have, especially with Generation Z, they're the most multiracial generation in the history of our country. And if you're not careful, you could look at an extremely diverse group of kids and assume that they all think differently, when in reality, there could be a lot of commonalities because of how multiracial they are. Now, it's probably a safe assumption to think and for your audience race, for example, the U.S. Census says by the year 2045, if you are Caucasian in America, you'll be the minority.
Wow.
In the state of Georgia, it's 2030. In the city of Atlanta, we've already passed that mark. So as a middle-aged white dude to stand up in front of a diverse audience and assume just because I see diversity, first of all, I need to assume that there's difference, but I also need to be aware of where is there sameness, because Generation Z sees color and they celebrate it.
Right.
The issue with multi-race as it relates to Generation Z isn't Generation Z. It's their moms and dads and their grandparents. So what I have to do then is to make sure, okay, what are the things from a demographic psychographic that I can uncover before I get there? I do think there are some things that I want to accomplish regardless of who's in the audience.
Yeah.
I call it the Jimmy V principle. If you spend any time watching ESPN during Cancer Awareness Month, they will always replay this very famous speech by Jim Valvano, who died of cancer. The Jimmy V Foundation raises millions and millions of dollars for cancer research. And he gave this speech. In one paragraph of his speech, Jason, changed me forever, because I think it should be a communicator's mantra. He said, if you laugh, if you think, and you are moved, your emotions are moved every day, that's a full day. You have lived a full day. So when I communicate, I want to make people laugh.
Yep.
I want to make them think, and I want to move their emotions, regardless of what the demographic or psychographic is. The other thing I would say too, and I learned this a long time ago, whatever I'm saying, I want to make it as clear as mud. Is it memorable? Is it understandable? And is it doable? Like, can they remember what I'm talking about? Do they understand what I'm talking about? And do they know how to apply whatever it is that I am talking about? And then determining what is the common denominator among all of us. So I'm like, a lot of times what I will do is I am notorious is not, infamous is not the word. Maybe it's a rut, but I get the hives when communicators walk out on the stage and they do a 10-minute presentation of who they are.
Right.
And I don't mean to offend anybody that's watching or listening, because if that's your jam, rock on. But kids do not care who I am unless I say something that moves them.
Right.
So I'm much more apt to start with a story or one sentence that's a zinger, or a movie clip that immediately gets us all on the same page. So I don't have to spend any time going, my name is Stuart, here's my wife, and here's my kids, and this is what we do for fun, and look how pretty my wife is. And I mean, kids do not care.
Yeah.
What they care about is, am I going to be miserable for the next 30 minutes? Or is this dude going to help me laugh, think, and move my emotions? So, and back to that diverse point, I cannot communicate effectively to a diverse audience. And with who I speak to more often than not, it's extremely diverse because they're the most multiracial generation in the history of our country. It is impossible for me to speak effectively to diversity if our dining room table isn't diverse.
Yeah.
If my library isn't diverse.
Yep.
And if I am not spending time understanding people that I am not like.
Wow. Absolutely.
Sorry, I'm passionate about this, so I apologize if it.
I love it.
Off the top rope.
No, it's absolutely fantastic. My family, we had 4 of our own children, and then we adopted a little boy from China. And my wife's side, multiracial, they fostered many special needs babies, and then they have fostered and then adopted a Korean baby and then an African American baby. And so our families are just this, but it's just amazing when you do come across people who have not yet been entrenched in that yet to realize, oh, wait a minute, this is where everything is going.
Right.
We've got to be able to understand, where people are different. And that's just a huge, that's
And
just a huge place you took us.
I could not agree with you more, Jason. And I would even take it a step further. Even if the room is not diverse, I feel an immense responsibility to help them understand diversity.
Yes.
And it's not just, I tell this story often. Several summers ago, I was speaking there was 5,000 high school kids in an arena in Florida.
Wow.
I was speaking, and I didn't even press the gas on the diversity issue. I just made mention of the fact that there are people in here, you are the anomaly in the room because you don't look like everybody else. And this blew me away. I got a DM less than 10 minutes after I walked off stage by a small group leader he was a small group leader at one of the churches who was from Iran.
Wow.
He's an emergency room doctor, gave his life to Jesus years ago. And here's what he said, Jason. He said, it's the first time I've sat in any sort of Christian environment where I felt like I was seen.
Huh.
Part of our job as a communicator is to every single person, if it's a multiracial issue, if it's a sexual fluidity issue, I want you to know I see you.
Yeah.
And I care about you. I have a deep conviction about that because I think that's the kind of person Jesus was and is. And I have a deep conviction about that as a communicator because I want to make sure I can connect with as many people who are in the room.
Yes. Yes. So that's a great place where you're taking us. There are few communicators who can speak to a room of 5,000, who can speak to a room of 5, who, everybody feels like, wow, they're really talking to me. What do you think? How do you think a communicator gets to that place where they're able to, whether it's a small group, a large group, giant group, people still feel like it's personal and intense and real? What goes into that?
Cool. One thing I would say immediately is I didn't start out speaking to 5,000 people.
Right.
I started speaking as a college athlete who had just started following Jesus, and I was the only Christian on our team, on our college basketball team, and we would have FCA every Wednesday, and I would be the only person to show up. So he literally had no other choice. Like FCA became chaplain discipling Stuart because Stuart was the only guy to be there. And then he, at the end of that year, was like, I think you should start telling your story. And so he would take me to these middle schools and high schools where there would be, 15 kids at 7:00 in the morning because they were going to get a free Hardee's biscuit, and he would throw me up in front of them and go at it. And the thing that I remember someone saying is, when you're in front of an audience of 15, you need to be as focused and as diligent as you would standing in front of 5,000 people.
Yeah.
And there are things that translate from the 15 to 5,000 that I don't think translate from 5,000 to 15.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't work in reverse. Like the ability, like I even put this when you sent me the questions, I thought about, like, I ask every place that I go, can you turn the lights up when I'm speaking? Because I want to see eyeballs and faces.
Yes.
And I know we're in an overproduced time in our country, especially in faith communities. And I know so many production, teams, they've spent so much time trying to make it look cool. I need to see faces and eyeballs.
Yeah.
Because I just did a parent event right outside of Detroit this past weekend. And the stage was I think the stage was almost 6 feet high.
Huh.
And the closest table felt like it was 15 yards away from the stage. And I asked them, can you turn the lights up and can I come and stand down on the floor? Because I want to be able to see eyeballs and faces.
Yep.
Like you don't learn that if all you're ever doing is standing up in front of 5,000 people.
Right.
So I think there is something to look like making contact with a kid.
Yeah.
There is something too. I think making eye contact with a kid many times will alleviate some of the people who are distracted or are disengaged.
Yeah.
And not giving them the stinky eye. You're not talking about, dude, you better, I'm talking about just make eye contact with them. Being able to ask, what's your name? Like if I'm telling a story and I try to make it first person story, like, what's your name? If I ask Sarah, like that works with 15 kids and that works with 5,000 kids. Using a kid as an illustration. That same event I was talking about, I pulled a kid out of the audience that I probably should have pulled because this dude's shorts. I just want to say to all the young men out there, we used to call girls who wore short shorts hoochie mamas. There's some hoochie daddies out there now. And this dude had on a pair of shorts that left nothing to the imagination.
Oh, no.
And I pull him up on stage and I realize I can't send him back because that'll be even more embarrassing. And he was like, "Damn." But it endeared me to the room.
Yeah.
It endeared me to the room because he was laughing. I was laughing. We would start giggling because of how ridiculous his shorts were. But just those little things you learn over time, like those are things that connect you to the audience.
Yep.
And what it does is it just wins you relational leverage.
Yes. Yep. Boy, that's so good. Well, take us to a time where, the connection was just off. Like, you're speaking, nobody is engaged. I mean, has there ever been a moment like that? How did you recover? What did you do? Did you just chalk it up? Tell us about any of those kind of times.
There's too many, like the whole podcast can be those. Anytime I stand up in front of middle school students, I feel that way. You know what? One of the most recent ones, I still don't know why they did this, but I was asked to speak. I did a student weekend at First Baptist Church, Montgomery, Alabama, on MLK weekend. If you don't know the history of Dr. King, like Montgomery is a big part of his story. And they asked me to speak to the entire church, 2 services on Sunday.
Wow.
First Baptist Montgomery is pretty high church.
Yeah.
Organ, choir. I hadn't been in a context like that in a long time. And most of the people, I mean, it's packed, both services, but most of the people, especially in the first service, were not young. And I got nervous. It's the first time in a long time that I'm always nervous before I speak,
Sure.
But I'm like, this is going to go over like a pregnant pole vaulter. It is not going to go well.
Right.
And what I realized quickly, and the principle holds true with teenagers too, is don't pretend to be somebody that you're not.
Ooh, yes.
So with students, for me to use words like dope and fire and slay as a 55-year-old white guy is dumb.
Yeah.
With adults, for me to not act like Kelly and I are the parents of a 27, 25, 22-year-old, and in that particular instance, talking about people's children and grandchildren and the impact grandmothers and grandfathers want to have on their kids, it was like ice melting. You could literally see it.
Wow.
And when I walked off stage after there was a line.
Huh.
I don't know how this woman did it, but a grandmother got our home address and sent me a card and thanked me for one thing that I said in that talk. I talked about on the other side of your view is a who. And because the older you are, you can have such judgment toward the next generation. But just remember, on the other side of your judgment and your view of them is a who.
Wow.
So I think you're always the other thing too, I hope you take this the way I mean it. I'm not everybody's cup of tea.
Right.
Like, I'm completely comfortable knowing, where you and I met, usually there's more than one communicator that week of camp, and that's on purpose.
Yeah.
Because we know that I may not be able to connect with every kid.
Right.
And there's probably in every audience you speak to someone who just does not smell what you're cooking.
Yep.
And I got to be okay with that.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean I failed. It doesn't mean I don't love that kid. I hate that we didn't connect.
Yeah.
But I always think of it this way. I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but I can be somebody's shot of tequila. I can be somebody's like, oh, that woke me up. And even if they didn't appreciate everything that I said, there was something that I said that connected.
Oh, wow. Wow, that's good. And that will help so many young communicators because you really do want to be everybody's cup of tea until you get to that breaking point in that place. I love that. Hey, as our conversation kind of comes to a close, you've given us, man, I've taken a couple.
Yeah, sorry, I talked too much. My bad.
No, it was great. I take a couple pages of notes. Any lasting advice that you would give, newer communicators, younger communicators, just about connecting with their audience effectively, anything that you share kind of last.
I would say a couple things. One, as quickly as you can, discover your own voice.
Oh.
Become comfortable being you.
Yeah.
And I did it. Everybody does it. When I first started speaking, I would hear Tony Evans on the radio, and I would be like, I'm going to yell at everybody. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be that guy. And then I would hear a comedian, and I'm like, you know what? No, I'm going to make everybody laugh.
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, the influences you sit under all the time, you actually start communicating like the people that you sit under,
right?
You listen to. I think there's a danger in you always. That's why when I am asked, hey, who would you suggest that I listen to as it relates to becoming a better communicator? I always tell guys and girls, watch comedians, don't watch preachers. Because comedians are the best communicators and they're the last prophets.
Yeah.
Because communication-wise, they're the best with transitions and they're the best in being able to say something that's really, really true, but it hurts too much to say it without using humor.
Right.
And they have mastered the art of saying hard things so that we can take them. So,
wow.
All that being said, who are you? Who are you when you're speaking to people off stage? Our son, when he was really little, we were flipping through the channels and a TV preacher came on, a televangelist. And this dude was just sweating and, spitting. And Grant, our son, looked at me and goes, Dad, do you think that dude talks like that in real life? And what he was really saying is when he walks off stage, is that who he is? This is a great question for young communicators. Do you become a different person when you walk off stage or walk on stage?
Right.
Like the greatest leverage you have is the same person you were on stage is an even better version of you when you walk off stage. So I don't want my voice changing, my inflection changing, but all that is a result of you discovering who you are and just be the best version of you. You don't need to be some other, Stephen Furtick, Judah, whomever.
Right.
Just be you.
Right.
Two more things quickly. The other one is, I call it the Chihuahua versus St. Bernard principle. As it relates to your cadence and tone, I hear a lot of communicators, especially when they're younger, they step on stage and they're already in fifth gear and they stay in fifth gear.
Wow. Yeah.
And what winds up happening is the audience becomes emotionally exhausted because your tone and your cadence is like, if you ever been around a Chihuahua, that's a Chihuahua. It's like, it's just always yapping.
Yep.
Saint Bernard, on the other hand, you rarely hear a Saint Bernard bark.
Right.
But when they bark, everybody's like, what was that?
Yep.
if you're not careful, and it is really from your passion and because you're excited, you can be a Chihuahua when you need to be a Saint Bernard.
Yeah.
Like, learn how to shift gears.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to start a talk in fourth, shift to fifth, go down to first. I mean, it's a constant shifting gears. Last thing I would say is, do not, people, especially teenagers, people get exhausted by effort. If you're trying too hard, the place that I see it often with young communicators is pacing. There's a ton of pacing.
Yep.
And again, you do it in the name of passion. But before long, regardless of whether you're passionate about it or not, it gets translated as you're either nervous or you're trying too hard.
Right.
So you're better off, and this bleeds into the Chihuahua St. Bernard principle, you're better off anchoring yourself and thinking oscillating fan versus I'm going to pace all the time and everybody's going to get dizzy watching me move. And then as you're pacing all the time, you're also becoming like a Chihuahua, because there are times when you become an oscillating fan, what winds up happening when you do need to make a point that's incredibly powerful.
Right.
Now I have reserved the right to take a couple of steps and make an emphatic point, and people pay attention.
Right.
You're doing this all the time.
Right.
They don't pay attention because they become exhausted by your movement. Those would be my three.
Ooh, boy, those are so rich and so helpful. And Stuart, I just know this conversation will help and provide just a lot of depth and resources to many communicators. So thank you so much. Hey, before we let you go, I thought we'd just ask you some rapid fire questions, just a little bit more about yourself as we kind of finish up. But
fire away.
So, do you have a favorite, guilty pleasure TV show that you're watching right now?
Your Honor with Bryan Cranston on HBO.
Okay, Your Honor.
And Dear Edward. I don't know if you've seen those two shows. Your Honor blows Kelly's and my socks off. Unbelievable drama set in New Orleans. Bryan Cranston is a judge. I don't want to tell you about it. But
yeah.
Your Honor.
I love it. Okay.
Is today Friday?
Today is Thursday.
Today's Thursday. Tomorrow it comes out. The next.
Okay.
Episode, so.
Okay, good. Oh, interesting. Question 2, if you're a podcast person, is there one that kind of your go-to right now?
I am a huge Adam Grant fan, so Rethinking with Adam Grant, and also a Malcolm Gladwell fan. So I love Revisionist History with Malcolm Gladwell and Rethinking with Adam Grant.
Awesome. Last question. Being from the motherland there, are you more of a Chick-fil-A person? Do you occasionally go over to Zaxby's or PDQ, or do you stick with, are you faithful with the Chick-fil-A?
If my only two choices are fast food fried chicken, which at my age I should never put in my body, it would be Chick-fil-A. But probably because I ate Zaxby's. You ever done this? Like you ate something and you got sick, and from that point on you can't eat it anymore?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. That happened to me with Zaxby's, and consequently I can see it and get nausea. If you're watching and you work with Zaxby's, it's not a reflection on your food. I just got a stomach bug.
Well, goodness gracious. Thank you so much for being with us. Tell us where people can find you online. What's the best place to, get more of your resources and things?
My social media handles, I am on Twitter and Instagram. I'm not on Facebook because that's a dumpster fire. Twitter's not much better. It's very narcissistic. It's I am Stuart Hall, at I am Stuart Hall, and Stuart is spelled Stuart. And if anybody has a question or comments and want to direct them directly to me, I am Stuart@me.com. You can email me there.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being a part. So appreciate this. And thank you for joining us on this week's episode of the Speak with People podcast. Again, if you are looking for help coaching, you just need, to that next step to improve your communication. Thank you for heading to the speakwithpeople.com website. You'll find information about our coaching and our training on there. Again, appreciate every time you listen, you download, the podcast. It means the world. Lastly, this podcast exists because words matter, and we believe healthy communication is oxygen for your relationships and your leadership. So whether you communicate one-on-one, on a team, from a stage, or from a screen, we hope that this time challenged you, encouraged you, inspired you to choose to communicate in healthy ways. We know that it will improve your world for the better. Thanks again, and we'll see you next week.